Welcome. In today's video, we are going to be looking at Boxplot. Boxplot is a common visual, but a lot of times people complain that it looks somehow complex. In today's video, I'm going to demystify Boxplot by explaining it in detail. Let me give us a scenario which we are going to be using throughout this explanation. Let's assume that in a supermarket, we want to monitor sales of a particular commodity. We have a 100-day period recording the quantity sold of that particular commodity. With this background in mind, we are going to be looking at the elements of the Boxplot. First thing is an outlier. If on average our sales is around 50, then the day we sell 300 units of that item, then we are going to see that as an outlier because it's very different from the 50 we expect. That is what an outlier is. Another outlier is the lower outlier, which will be somewhere at the bottom. Instead of the 50 we expect to sell in a day, or slightly above or slightly below 50, which is normal sale, we now record 2 sales. It's also an outlier. Now, why is an outlier important? An outlier is important because it hints about so many things. For example, an outlier hints that there might be error in the data entry, or it shows that something happened. How did we manage to make 300 sales? Is there something that we did that is exceptional? Now we can use that as a feedback to improve our business. The next element of the Boxplot is the whiskers. The whiskers represent the top 25% sales. Out of the 100 days, on which days do we have the highest sales? Counting it from the topmost to the 25th. That is what we have in the upper whiskers. And on the lower whiskers, which is here, we are going to be looking at 25% of sales from the least to the 25th, going from the bottom to the top. And that's the points that we're going to have here on the whiskers. So every sale here is going to be the bottom sale. And every sale here is going to be the top 25% sale. The next thing is the interquartile range, which is the box we have here. The box represents the mid 50%. Since we have 25% on the upper whiskers, 25% on the lower whiskers, we are going to be left with 50%. And the 50% is the points that we're going to have in this box. So every point in this box is within the 50%. Now there is a line. This red line you can see is the 50th percentile. Now imagine that we have 25 items. Here, 25 points, and then we have 25 points here. This line shows that there are bottom 25 of the 50 and there are top 25 of the 50. Now, if the line is high, that means the top 25 of the 50 have high values. It signifies high performance. But if the red line is low, it means that there is concentration of poor sales, which will all be squeezed at the lower part of the line. That means that the performance in sales is low. Now with this overview, let's jump and see how we can create Boxplot to compare data in Tableau. Our data set is a text file, so we select text and we select our data set sales Now let me give us a tour of our data set. You can see there is month, we have region, Africa and Europe. Then we have commodity, which is milk and rice. And then we have sales. That's monthly sales of these commodities. Right? So, and the data set is a year long. Now we select our visual and create our box plot. The first thing we need to do is to drag sales to the row, and we have aggregate of the sales. But we can disaggregate it by unchecking the aggregate. So we click on analysis and uncheck the aggregate, and we have them as data points. Now we can reduce the data point to have them as dots. So we reduce them just like this. And then the next thing is to drag our commodity to the column. Once we have this, we can create our box plot by right-clicking this, and then we click Add Reference Line. We now select box plot. We have the option to select different colors, and then we say OK. Now with this, we have our box plot for milk and rice side by side. Let's try to interpret this. Now, the first thing I want us to observe, let me increase the size of the points. The first thing I want us to observe is the milk. Can you see that there is a point here? It's an outlier because it's far above the whiskers. Any point that is above the whiskers is an outlier, or below the whiskers. Now, we can see there are upper outliers. So imagine a sale of 184 is way above the whiskers. Then we have 87 is also above. We also observe the midline here. We can see that the midline of milk, when we compare it to the midline of rice, the midline of rice is above the midline of milk. This means that there is better performance in sales of milk when compared to sales of rice in general. However, we can also observe that rice does not have an outlier. Everything is within range. And then we will now begin to interpret this outlier. What does this outlier mean? So we go further to investigate. To investigate this outlier, what is our aim? We are investigating the outlier to see if there was mistake in data entry. It's possible. The person wanted to type 84 and then made mistake and typed 184. These are reasons why we look at outlier. Now, apart from that, we can also study our outlier to see what happened on that day. Probably that commodity had a very high demand on that particular day. So you make decision based on the available data. This outlier can point at something that on this day we had a spike of sale. What happened on that day? You go further to investigate and see if there are variables that you need to work on to improve your sales generally based on the performance that you experience on that day. So also at any point we can change our color by right-clicking here. We just go to Format, and then we select a color of choice. There are a number of colors we can select from. That is how to create a box plot side by side in Tableau to compare the performance of variables. We can also change the category. From commodity, you can check the performance based on region. So we drop this here and we extend. Now, if you look at region, our outline is coming from the Europe region. You can see clearly. And we can see that when you look at the sales based on region, we have similar middle values, meaning both regions have to some extent average performance. However, the middle line is in the middle in Africa, is pushed towards the bottom of the box in Europe, showing that there are more data points that sold above the middle value than those below the middle value in Europe. That's what it means. So we can see that there is better performance in sales in Europe. That's how to work with Boxplot. Thanks for watching.